Hello there, and welcome to a project video where you'll build and deploy an advanced travel companion app using Google Maps. With Geolocation, Google Maps API, the ability to search for places, fetching restaurants, hotels, and attractions based on location from specialized rapid APIs, data filtering, and much more. In this one video, you'll learn advanced React best practices such as folder and file structure, hooks, and refs. You're gonna also learn how to improve security by using environment variables. You'll learn creating user interfaces using Material UI. You'll of course also learn working with Google Maps API, and most importantly, fetching data from unlimited sources using Rapid API. Essentially, you'll become the master of working with APIs. I initially planned on putting this as a paid course, but I later decided to release it completely free for you guys here on YouTube. So, to support this video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. It shouldn't take more than a few seconds, and I really appreciate it. In the end of this video, we'll deploy this application so that you can share it with your friends, put it on your portfolio, and get a job. Before we dive into the project, I have an important announcement for you. For quite some time now, I have been working on something big. I'm creating a custom platform where you'll be able to learn by creating even better and more professional projects. It'll take a long time to turn this into a reality, but I want you to make the most important decisions during the process. So, click the mailing list link down in the description so that you can stay up to date and choose which projects will be built first. Big news coming soon. With that said, let's dive straight into the video. Before we create a folder for our project code, we must first visit Rapid API. The link is going to be down in the description. The making of this entire app is possible only due to Rapid API, because we are using their Travel Advisor API. This Travel Advisor API is just one of hundreds of thousands of APIs available on their API hub. You're gonna learn how to use most of these endpoints from this specific API, how to get different hotels, restaurants, and attractions. And finally, we're gonna use one more API from their platform, which is called Open Weather Map. This API is going to give us weather based on a city name, or in our case, based on the coordinates of the map. So, to be able to use these APIs, make sure to visit the Rapid API link in the description, and then you can click Sign Up or Log In. In this case, I'm gonna log in since I already have the account, and you can log in with Google, GitHub, Facebook, or your regular email. Once you're in, you'll be redirected to their API hub, where you can find hundreds of thousands of APIs. This was the first step in our video. Now, let's create our React application, and then later on, we're gonna call these APIs right from our React application. Before we dive into the code, please allow me to give you a quick demo of the entire application. At the top, we have a navigation bar that says Travel Advisor, Explore New Places, and then in here, we have entire Google Maps search. So if you start typing something like New York, you'll be able to see all the locations that are related to that search term. We have beautiful images belonging to each single restaurant, the restaurant's name, rating, number of reviews, pricing, all the specific certificates, as well as the location and different types of food they prepare. So everything is here in this nicely styled card. As you can see, this is how it looks like. For example, Tomino is rated 5 stars out of 208 reviews. The price is medium. They are the 32nd best rated restaurant in New York City. They have 2 certificates of excellence. And they prepare Spanish food on this location. This is their phone number. And if you click, you'll be redirected to the TripAdvisor page, where you'll be able to read all the reviews. Also, you can visit their website, and as you can see, this looks pretty good. We can also filter restaurants by rating, so let's search for all above 4.0. There we go. And finally, this website is not only for restaurants. You can search for hotels. Take a look at this. With just a bit of loading, you get all the best hotels in New York City. And the situation is the same. You have a large image displaying the hotel, you have the price, ratings, and all the certificates that they have. And finally, we also have attractions. So let's say you're visiting New York. This application gives you everything you need. It gives you attractions you can visit, places you can stay at, and restaurants where you can eat at. So in here, you can see all the attractions. That's looking pretty good. And one more important thing is you can browse the map and locations reload every time you switch the map. So there we go. You can even unzoom to get more. And you can click on a specific card and it's gonna bring you right to it. There we go, Soho. You can visit everything there is to visit. If you zoom out even more, it's gonna give you more locations around New York and wider area. I've also went ahead and implemented one more API to make this even more complete. As you can see, here we have the sun icon, and right here we have the cloudy sun icon. This is real-time weather from New York. We're gonna use one more extra API so that our visitor knows absolutely everything they need to know when they're visiting a specific place. Let's make sure our app works for different places. So for example, let's go to New Delhi. There we go. It's currently cloudy there. And take a look. We have all the attractions there. Let's look for restaurants. There we go. So if you're visiting, you know where to go. Since this is a big application, during the process of building it, you might come across a few errors that are gonna happen to you. And that's completely fine. So if that happens, the link to the entire GitHub code is going to be down in the description. Make sure to visit it and then compare your code with the code right in here. That should solve all of your potential problems while going through the video. Also, while you're here, make sure to give it a star. As always, to start off, we're going to create a new folder. Let's name it something like travel_advisor. There we go. And finally, we can also open an empty Visual Studio Code window. Of course, you can use any code editor. In this case, I'll be using Visual Studio Code. Once you have it open, simply drag and drop the folder right inside of it. And we are in. Finally, go to View and then Terminal. This is going to open the Visual Studio Code integrated terminal. Now we're going to run some commands to initialize a React application. To run these commands, you have to have Node installed. So if you don't already, make sure to visit nodejs.org and then simply download the current version. Once you do that, you can simply run npx create-react-app and then /. This is going to generate an empty React application right inside of your folder. Let's wait a minute while our application is initializing and we'll be right back. And our application is initialized. They say happy hacking. We won't be hacking today, but we'll be creating an amazing travel companion application. With that said, there's something that I always do to newly created React applications, and that is to clean it up a bit. As you can see, we have quite a lot of files here, which we're not gonna use. So let's simply delete the source folder. And once it is deleted, let's create a new folder called exactly the same. Now, as you might know, every React application needs to have an index.js file. So this is going to be the first file we're gonna create. Inside of the index.js file, we can import React from React, and then we can also import React DOM from React-DOM. We're also going to import a file that doesn't exist yet. That's going to be import app from /app. We're gonna create that component really soon, but for now, let's say React DOM.render, and then inside of that render, we're gonna have the app component like this, self-closing component, and then we're also gonna say document.getElementById, and we're gonna have root. In every single React application, we have to mount our application onto the root div. If you're new to React, let me show you where that div is. We have quite a lot of files here as well, so for now I'm gonna delete them. We don't need this favicon. We also don't need these logos and the manifest, so I'm gonna delete all of them. We only have the index.html. And it might seem like we have a lot of stuff here, but if we properly structure this out, I'm gonna put this in one line, I'm gonna remove these comments right here, and you're gonna notice that this is nothing more than an empty index.html document with a single div with an ID of root. And inside of here will be our entire React application. With that said, let's create our app.js. This is going to be the starting point and the most important component of our entire application. Inside of here for now, we're gonna simply import React from React. We're gonna create a functional app component like this. That's going to be const app is equal to an arrow function. And then inside of there, we can simply return. In this case, we're gonna return a div. Inside of that div, we're gonna have an h1 that says hello world. And now that we have it, of course, it's not being used. So we have to do export default app. And finally, if we end up seeing this on the screen, that means that we have set up everything correctly. Before we go ahead and run this application, let's open up View and then Terminal. And then inside of here, let's install all the necessary dependencies throughout the process of building our application. To install dependencies, you can say npm install, and then we can start listing them out. The first dependency on the list is going to be add material-ui /core. The second one is going to be add material-ui /icons. The third one is going to be add material-ui /lab. As you can see, we'll use quite a lot of things from Material UI. Then the next dependency is going to be add React-Google-Maps and then /API. We're also going to need Axios, and we're gonna need one more Google Map dependency, this time for that little search bar at the top right. So let's install Google-Map-React. These are all the dependencies that we need. So let's install them. The process of installation is going to take a minute, so feel free to grab a glass of water, coffee, beer, whatever you prefer, and get ready to code out this phenomenal project. Now that we've installed all the dependencies, you can run npm start. With that, you can also close the terminal so that we can see our code better. And this automatically opened up our browser on localhost 3000, and we see hello world right here, which means we've done everything correctly so far. Now is the time that we actually start building the layout and the functionality of our application. Let's start with the folder structure. We're gonna have one new folder inside of the source folder, which is going to be called components. Inside of that components, we're gonna have 4 different components. So let's create a new folder for each one of them. The first one is going to be our header. Then also inside of the components, we're gonna have a list. This is going to be the list of places. Then we're gonna have our map. And finally, we're gonna have our place details component. So let's call it place details. Now, each one of these folders represents a component. So let's create a component file for each one of them. New file, and that is going to be header.jsx. Let's repeat the process for all of them. Inside of the list, list.jsx. Inside of the map, that's going to be map.jsx. And finally, we're going to have place details, so place details.jsx. Each component is also going to have a separate style sheet coming from Material UI. So to create a style sheet, simply create a new file inside of the folder. Let's start with the header and let's call it styles.js. You can now copy this empty file 3 more times. So list has to have styles, map, and finally the place details. Now let's create dummy components for each one of these components. So we can start with a header, and that's going to look like this. Import React from React, const header, that is going to be a functional component. And then inside of there, let's return In this case, we want to return an h1, and the h1 is going to say header. Finally, we also have to export that component, so let's do export default header. Great, so now this is our dummy component. Let's copy it. Let's first go to our list. Now to quickly rename a lot of things, you can simply click on the header, click F2, and then simply rename it, in this case, to list. There we go. And inside of there, we can also say list. Let's go to our map, copy and paste, press F2. This is going to be a map. Inside of there, we can also say map. And finally, to our place details, we can paste it. F2, this is going to be place details. And then inside of there, we can also one more time say place details. Now that we have all of the files and folders ready, we can start importing them inside of our app.js. So we can say import header from, that's going to be /components, and then finally /header, and then just one more time header to get into that JSX component. Now we can duplicate this line 2 more times. For the second time, we can call this a list. So to quickly rename it, hold Alt and then double click right there, there, and there. This is going to be our list. And then finally, we also need a map. So let's rename this to map. Great. Now we have everything that we need. Finally, let's start importing some of the things from Material UI to start creating our layout. In this case, we're going to say import curly braces. We first need CSS baseline. This is a component from Material UI that simply normalizes the styles. So it's just going to fix some paddings, margins, and background colors immediately for us. And then we also need a grid. That's going to be coming from @materialui/core. Now, inside of the JSX for our app, we can turn this into a React fragment. And then just below, we can call a self-closing CSS baseline component. Instead of this h1 tag, we're going to have our header component. It's going to be a self-closing component. Below the header, we're going to have our grid. This grid is going to be of a type container. So we can say container. Spacing is going to be equal to 3. And we can also give it an inline style that's going to be equal to width is equal to a string of 100%. Remember, since we're doing inline styles, it has to be an object, so you're going to have double curly braces. Inside of that grid, we're going to have one more grid. This grid is going to be of type item, and it's going to have 2 properties. XS is equal to 12. This means that this grid is going to take full width on mobile devices, but then on medium devices and larger, it's only going to take 4 spaces. Remember, that list was only showing on the left side and the map was taking much more space. This is what makes it happen. Only take 4 out of 12 spaces on medium or larger devices. Now we can expand that and we can copy that grid. The first grid is going to contain our list component. So we can say list, and that list is going to be a self-closing tag. Finally, the second grid is going to contain our map. So let's say map, which is also going to be our self-closing tag. I said that the map is much larger when compared to the list, so it's going to take 8 spaces on medium or larger devices. Now let's save this, and if our terminal is running, we should be able to see this rendered on localhost 3000. And there we go. Initial layout and folder structure is done. Although this doesn't look like anything right now, we simply have a header, we have a list, and then map on the side, but we've done a lot of work. We've prepared our code base for everything that's going to come right now. So let's keep things going and let's create our header. To start off, we can close all of our other files and folders just so we have a clean workspace, and then we can collapse it and simply open just the header.jsx. Inside of here, we're first going to import a few things. We can import, in curly braces, autocomplete. And this autocomplete is coming from React-Google-Maps and then /API. Below that, we want to import a few things from Material UI. So these are going to be app bar. We also want to have a toolbar. Then we're going to have a typography, an input base, and finally a box. All of this is coming from @materialui/core. So let's create the layout for a navigation bar. Instead of this H1, we're going to have the app bar like this. And the position of the app bar is going to be static. So we can say position is equal to static. Then inside of there, we're going to have a toolbar. That toolbar is going to have a class name equal to curly braces classes.toolbar. Right now, we're going to have an error saying that the classes is not defined. But don't worry about that. Soon enough, we're going to import the classes from Material UI and we're going to add them. Inside of the toolbar, we're going to have a typography. That typography is going to be of a variant equal to H5. If you've never used Material UI before, don't worry, I'm going to lead you through the process. But basically, typography is simply every single text element. But you can change the variant. You can make it headings, subtitles, and titles. In this case, we want this pretty big, so I'm going to leave it as H5. Then we're also going to give it a class name equal to classes.title. Inside of there, we can simply say something like travel advisor. Below that, we're going to have a box. In Material UI, a box is basically a div, but you can simply set a display of flex and some other properties. Then inside of there, we want to have one more typography, so we can simply copy this one. I copied it, indented it properly, and this one is going to be a variant of H6, and we're also going to leave the class name of title. In this one, we can simply say something like explore new places. Now, still inside of this box, but below this typography, we're going to have our autocomplete component. It is not going to be a self-closing component, so that means that we want to have something inside of it. More specifically, we want to have one div, and that div is going to have a class name equal to classes.search. This is going to be our search bar or search box. Inside of that div, we want to have yet another div, and this div is going to have a class name equal to classes.search icon. Inside of that div, we can of course have our search icon. So let's call it like this, search icon, and it is a self-closing tag. Of course, we have to import that search icon. So at the top, let's do just that. Import search icon, and this will be coming from @materialui/icons, not core. In this case, it's going to be icons. Finally, below this inner div, we want to have one more thing, and that final thing is going to be called input base. It is going to be a self-closing component with a few props. First, it's going to have a placeholder equal to search ... And then we're going to have some classes. In this case, classes is going to be equal to an object because we want to add multiple classes. First, we're going to set our root class to be equal to classes.input_root, and then our input is going to be set to classes.input_input, like this. It's a bit weird of a naming, but it should do us just fine. Great, we're done with the layout. But if we try to render this right now, that wouldn't work because we have a lot of errors. First of all, our classes are not defined, and it also looks like we're missing something right here at the top. It says that we have to add one more / and then search. Here is where our icon is. Great. So now we can clearly see that we're missing all of our classes. So how do the classes work in Material UI? Well, remember, we already have the styles.js file. So inside of there, we need to import some things. In this case, it's going to be import make styles, and this will be coming from @materialui/core/styles. Below, we want to export these styles, so we can say export default, make styles. We can call this as a function, and then inside of there, it requires one more callback function. The callback function inside returns an object, so we have to wrap it in parentheses like this. Great. Finally, whatever styles you want to add, you can simply add them in CSS in JS type of way. That means that if you want to have a class named title, you would create a title property that's going to be an object, and then you can set the color to be equal to red. It is kind of clumsy to write CSS in this way, but I found it to work really well with Material UI, and you get a lot of benefits this way because they also give you a theme object which allows you to use their colors, paddings, and everything else. Now, this is not a CSS video. You're here to create this phenomenal project to learn how to create logic, use APIs, Google Maps, and everything else. That's why I don't want to waste your time by writing this CSS by hand. So, find the link in the description, and there you'll be able to find all the styles for this specific project. Once you have them, simply copy and paste them in each specific style sheet. Header styles have the most CSS, but you can see it's not that a lot, but then all the other component styles don't have a lot of CSS at all, so you can simply inspect it, see if you want to change something, and really learn it if that's what you want. With that said, now we have the style sheet, and finally we can go back inside of our header and we can import it. So right inside of here, we can say import use styles, and that's going to be coming from /styles. Great. Now, just by looking at the name, you can notice that the use styles seems to be a hook. So let's call it how we usually call hooks. Const classes is equal to use styles, and then we call it as a function. Okay, now that we're done with the layout and we have our styles, we can simply save this and take a look in the browser. But before we do that, let's for now simply disable the autocomplete by commenting it out. Right now, we don't have everything set up for it yet, so if we simply save it and run it with it, we're gonna get some errors. But don't worry, we're gonna re-add it back really soon. Now, let's take a look in the browser. As you can see, this already looks much better. We have our heading, Travel Advisor, and on the right side, we have Explore New Places with this nice search bar that has a search icon. Now we are ready to start creating the main parts of this application, which are the list and the map. Let's go ahead and do that right away. Map is of course the main part of our application, so let's start with that. I'm going to open up our map component, and then in here we can start implementing the JSX. Let's first import a few things. We're going to import Google Map React. This will be coming from Google-map-react. Then we're gonna import some things from Material UI. So we can say import, we're gonna need a paper. Paper is basically a div with a background color. We can also use typography. And finally, use media query. Use media query is going to help us with making our map more mobile responsive. We are also going to need a location outlined icon. So let's say import location outlined icon. And this will be coming from @material UI /icons and then /location outlined without the icon at the end. And finally, we're also going to import a rating component. So import rating from @material UI /lab. Some of the Material UI components are still being worked on. Rating is one of them. That's why we're not importing it from core, we are importing it from /lab. Okay, and we're going to repeat the process for importing the classes as well. So we can say import use styles from /styles. And then again, you can visit the link in the description and you can simply copy and paste the styles right in here. Once you have the styles, we can go back and we can start implementing the layout. At the top, we're going to call our hook, which is going to be const classes is equal to use styles, and we call it as a hook. Then we're also going to call the use media query hook so that we can use it later on. We can say const is mobile is equal to use media query, and we pass in a string. That string is going to have parentheses, And then inside of there, we can say min width is equal to 600 pixels. This means that this isMobile variable is going to be set to false if the width of the device is larger than 600 pixels. Now that we have everything we need, let's start writing our JSX. We're first going to have a div. That div is going to have a class name equal to classes.mapContainer. Right inside of that div, we're going to have possibly the most important component out here, and that is the Google Map React. Google Map React is not going to be a self-closing component, so we can open it like this, but we're going to have quite a few props we want to pass to it. First property is going to be bootstrap URL keys. And then inside of that object, you can say key is equal to, and now in here, we can specify the Google Maps key. To get our key, we'll have to create a new project on Google Developers Console. We're going to do that as soon as we add all the other props required for this Google Map React. The second property is going to be default center. So this is going to be the center of our map. And then in here, we can pass the coordinates. Right now, we don't have real coordinates, so I'm going to create const coordinates is equal to, that's going to be an object that's going to have the lat property, and it's also going to have the lng property. This is the latitude and this is the longitude. And in there, we're going to pass the coords. Below our default center, we're going to have a real center. So this is the current center of the map. And in there, we can also pass the coordinates. Of course, this here should have been coordinates. Then we can also set up the default zoom. Default zoom in this case, I found 14 to be working the best. So let's leave that. Finally, we're going to have some margins. So let me say margin is equal to, and then it accepts an array. It has 4 different properties. We're going to say 50 to the top, 50 on the right, 50 on the bottom, and 50 to the left side. Later on, we're going to have 3 more properties, which we're going to left empty for now. One of these is options. Then we're going to have the onChange property, which is going to be really important when you change the map. And finally, we are going to have the onChildClick property, which is going to be used when you actually click on a restaurant on the map. Right now, for this to work, these must not be empty, so I'm just going to put an empty string in there. And this is it. These are all the props that we need for our Google Map React. Now is a great time to get that key. To get the API key, you can go to console.cloud.google.com and then /project create. If you visit this link, you'll be redirected to the Google Cloud Platform, and there you'll be able to create the project and get the API key. Of course, if you're not logged in, you'll have to log in first, but then you should be redirected to this page. Now I'm going to make this a bit bigger for you, and we're going to give this project a name. Let's call it Travel Advisor. Okay, great. And finally, I'm going to click Create. Okay, at the top left, you should be able to select your projects and you can click Travel Advisor to switch to it. It should take just a few moments to create it. Then on the left side, you should be able to see APIs and services, and you can click Dashboard. In here, you can start searching for Maps. There we go. Maps JavaScript API is the one we'll be using. So you can click Enable. It took just a second and it redirected me to this page. Finally, you can click on Maps JavaScript API. And once you're here, go to Credentials on the left side. Once the page loads, click Create Credentials. In this case, we want to create an API key. And there we go. Our API key is right here. Let's copy it. And in our code, right here where our string of key is, let's paste that API key. Later on in the video, we're going to convert all of the API keys and data that should be secure to environment variables. That way, we're the only ones who can access it. With that said, just before we save, I noticed there's one small error right here, and that is that I mistyped styles. That's a rookie mistake. And at the top, location outlined icon is supposed to be location on outlined icon. Same thing here at the end, location on outlined. Save this and let's take a look in the browser. And there we go. This app already looks like something. We have the map on the right side. We can even make it full screen, and let's zoom out a bit. Looks like we're in the middle of the ocean. The entire map loaded. Now if we zoom out, that's great. We have a few different routes we can go right now. We can start implementing the search right now. Of course, if we search for something like New York right now, it's just a basic field. But we want the functionality to fetch all of the cities, streets, and everything in the world. We can do that, or we can immediately start creating the list, or we can start fetching the restaurants. This is the moment where you can really choose what you want to do next. In this case, I think that creating the layout for the list makes sense. That way, most of our layout is going to be done, and then we'll be able to get dirty and start working on the functionality of fetching all of the restaurants, hotels, and attractions. You already know the drill. Starting with the list is not going to be hard. We're just going to open up our list component. We're going to import a few things, and then we'll be able to start creating the layout. So what are we going to need from Material UI in this case? We can say import. We're going to need a circular progress. That is Material UI's loading bar. Then we're going to have a grid, a typography, one input label, as well as the menu item. And finally, a form control and a select element. All of this is, of course, coming from @materialui/core. In this case, let's also import our styles. So we can say import use styles from /styles. As simple as that. You already know the procedure. I think you even have all of the styles open in the browser right now. So simply copy and paste the styles for our list. There aren't many, as you can see right there, just some simple heights, margins, paddings, and so on. Nothing you wouldn't be able to do yourself, so don't worry about that. Now that we have the styles, we of course have to do const classes is equal to use styles. And with that, we are ready to start using all of these components. So first, we're going to have a div component. That div is going to have a class name equal to classes.container. Below that, we're going to have a typography component, and that typography is going to have a variant equal to h4. Inside of the typography, we're going to have something like restaurants, hotels, and attractions around you. Below that typography, we're going to have a form control element. So let's create that form control. Form control is going to have a class name equal to classes.formControl. Inside of our form control, let's create our input label. Our input label is simply going to say type. And just below our input label, we of course have to have the corresponding select element. Our select needs a value, which we're going to leave empty for now, and it also needs an onChange property. That onChange is also going to be empty for now. Inside of that select, we're going to have a menu item, like this, menu item, and that menu item is going to have a value equal to restaurants. And of course, it's simply going to say the same thing, restaurants. So if we select this first menu item, we'll get to restaurants. Now we can duplicate that 2 more times. If we select the second one, that's going to be hotels, like this. And the third one is going to be attractions. And finally, attractions. Now, this data has to be modified using state. So let's import use state in curly braces from React. So let's create a use state hook, const, and then we're going to have brackets. And then inside of there, we can say type and set type. The first thing is our state, and the second thing is a function that modifies that state. That is going to be equal to use state as a function, and it accepts one parameter, which is the first initial value that's going to be put into the variable of type. So in this case, let's say that the restaurants is the default value. Now that we have our type, we can say value is equal to type right inside of this select. And onChange, what do we want to do? Well, onChange is going to give us a callback function that has the event as the parameter, and we can simply say set type is equal to event.target.value. Inside of the event.target.value is where the value of the clicked element will be. So if you click on hotels, this thing is going to be populated with hotels, and then that's going to set the variable of type. We also want to copy this whole thing one more time, the entire form control. This part is going to stay the same. The input label is simply going to say rating instead of type this time. And then we have to also copy the use state one more time. This time we're going to have the rating and we're going to have the set rating. At the start, our rating can be set to just an empty string. So now that we have the rating, instead of the value of type, we're going to have rating. And instead of the set type, we're going to have the set rating. At the start, we're going to have all ratings. So restaurants or hotels with all the ratings. So we can say the value is equal to 0. Then just below that, we're going to have 3 stars. So we can say above 3.0. Then we're going to repeat that. This one can be 4. And we're going to say above 4.0. And finally, we can have a number of 4.5. And we can say above 4.5. So these are really good places. Great, we've written a lot of code. Now let's look at it in the browser. As you can see, we now have this great heading, restaurants, hotels, and attractions around you. We can choose between restaurants, hotel, and attractions, and we can choose the rating from all to above 3.0, 4.0, and finally above 4.5. That part is ready, but now is the most important part. We have to start rendering through the list of restaurants and then displaying a card for each specific place. So far, we haven't yet fetched restaurants, hotels, or attractions. So let's create a variable, const places, which is going to be a dummy variable for now. In there, we can simply say const places, and let's say that each place is an object, and it's going to have a name property. So the first one is going to have a name of something like cool place. Let's space this out properly, and let's create one more object. The second one is going to be, let's say, a pub, and let's say best beer. And finally, the third one is going to be best steak. Let's say these are the names for our places. Now that we have our places, just below the form control, we can actually loop over them. So I'm going to create a grid. That grid is going to be of a type container. It's going to have spacing equal to 3, and it's going to have a class name equal to classes.list. Inside of there, we can open a block of code and we can say places question mark dot. This means only if you have places, only then map over them. Map, of course, takes in a callback function like this, and then in each iteration of the callback, it has one new place. So if we're mapping over places, we can say in here, place. We're also going to need the index, and index is always given to you as the second parameter to the map function. Now we need curly braces if you really want to open this as a function, but in this case, we only need parentheses because we're going to instantly return a piece of JSX. So for each place, we want to return a grid, but this time not a grid container, rather grid item. That grid item is going to have a key equal to index. This is usually not a good practice, especially when you're deleting items from the list. But in this case, we won't be deleting them, so it's fine. And finally, we want to say XS is equal to 12. That means from extra small devices all the way to the big devices, they're gonna take the full width of the list container, which is 12 spaces. And finally, inside of the grid is where our card should be. Our card is yet another component that is a custom component we need to create, and that is the place details. So let's import at the top the place details component. Let's do it like this. Import place details from /place details /place details to get to the component. Now if you scroll down, instead of the card, we can render the place details, which is going to be a self-closing tag. Of course, one thing we have to pass into it is going to be a place, which is equal to this place right here. Great, let's scroll a bit up, and I'm just going to duplicate this 2 times just so we have more places to see. Now that this is saved, let's visit our place details. And remember, as props, we're getting our place. So this is how you can get props really easily. We passed it right inside of here, and we're getting it right inside of here. Instead of place details, let's render place.name. Remember, each place has a name, so let's render it for each one. Once you save this, let's take a look in the browser. And there we go. Alongside the header and the select fields, now we have the list. At this point, this list is looking kind of boring. It's just headings with the names of different places, like cool place, best beer, and best steak. But that's more than we need for now. Our next step is to finally fetch the data for all the restaurants, hotels, and attractions, and that way we'll have something to render out here and also to render on the map. Now we're finally getting our hands dirty, and I think this is the part of the video where you'll be able to learn the most. We'll work with the APIs, I'll teach you how to fetch data, how to properly structure that data, and how to keep it clean. It's always important to keep your code clean and secure. So we're gonna do that right away. To fetch our data, we of course have to make API calls. And to keep our code tidy, we're going to create a new folder inside of the source folder, which is going to be called API. Right inside of there, we can create a new file called index.js. This is where we're going to keep all of our API calls. Inside of that file, we're going to import Axios from Axios. Axios is the library that's going to help us make our calls. And in here, let's create a function that's going to make that API call. We can say const get places data. That is going to be an async function, so we can say async. And inside of there, we are going to have a try and catch block. Inside of the try block, we usually have a request. And if that request is successful, then the code runs as it's supposed to run inside of the try. But if the request fails, then our code is redirected to the catch error block. With that said, let's start by creating our first request. We can say const response is equal to, and then await, and then in here, we're gonna make the axios.get call. Now, of course, the main question is, to which URL are we going to make our API call to? And that is where the Rapid API comes into play. You can search for travel advisor and then click on the first API that appears. You'll be redirected to this page, and then right here, if you're using it for the first time, you have to click subscribe to this API. That's going to bring you to the pricing section, and then choose the basic plan. As you can see, it is completely free up to 500 requests a month. For our testing purposes, that's going to be more than enough. Once you're done with that, you can go back to our endpoints, and then in here, we can see what endpoints can we make. We can make endpoints to locations to get the autocomplete. We can also post different hotels or get hotels. We can list them by latitude and longitude, or we can list them by boundary. There are also some more endpoints which are deprecating. We also have the same thing for restaurants and for attractions. So, what do you say that we first make this work with restaurants? There is the restaurants list by latitude and longitude API call. As you can see, we have the latitude and longitude. And you might think this is great because we already have the coordinates that are in the center of the map. And let's click test to check it out. And we got back 33 restaurants based around that central location. That is great. But if you think about our application, if we wanted to showcase everything in the center of one dot, for example, let's say that we go to United States and let's say that we are in Kentucky. If we make this a central point, and if there are a lot of restaurants, all of the restaurants are going to be populated in this exact point. But we don't want to see the restaurants just around this central point. We want to see it in our entire visible area of the map. That's why we're going to use list in boundary. In this case, you have to pass the latitude and longitude of the bottom left corner of the map and also the top right corner latitude and longitude. So we have to find the position of the bottom left corner and the position of the top right corner. If we do that, the restaurants that we fetch are going to be scattered across our entire map. So how exactly can we make this call so that we get back this data? Well, Rapid API makes it extremely easy. As you can see, you can select your language right there, JavaScript, Axios, and you can basically just copy everything that is in here. Let's do just that. Once you copied it, we're going to paste it right in here at the top, and then we're going to make some small adjustments. In this case, I'm going to take this URL and I'm going to store it in a variable. We can say const URL is equal to this specific string. Since we're using Axios, the method is automatically going to be set to get, so we don't have to use that. Now, when it comes to params, we definitely need the bottom left latitude and longitude and the top right latitude and longitude, but we don't need any other of these options, so I'm simply going to delete them for now. And then we also need the headers. This is where your Rapid API key resides. That means that we'll also have to exchange this to environment variables later on in the video. This part we can delete because we already have our Axios call right there. So what we can do is we can use this URL right here, axios.getURL, and then the second parameter to the URL are the options. So we can simply pass the options object right inside of here. For now, this is going to be all that we need. We could return the response, but we're not really interested in the response itself. We're more interested in what's inside of the response, and that is going to be data. So we can immediately destructure the data right in here. And then one more time, we need to destructure the data from inside to get to our restaurants. Finally, we can return that data right here. Also, in the catch, we're simply going to console log the error. Now that we have our function, we can export it by saying export const getPlacesData. The main question now is, where are we going to call this function? And the answer is inside of the app.js. So let's go right there. And then at the top, let's import getPlacesData. And this is going to be imported from, that is going to be /API. Great. So now the question is, how can we call this function inside of our functional app component? The answer is, we are going to create a use effect. So just at the top, let's set up our use effect. We have it imported, and let's set it up right inside of here by saying use effect. That is, of course, a function that accepts another callback function. And don't forget, at the end of the function, we have to have the dependency array. If we leave this dependency array empty, that means that the code inside of this function block will happen only at the start of the application. And right now, that's exactly what we want to do. So I'm going to say getPlacesData, and we're simply going to call it as a function. Now, don't forget, this function returns something. More specifically, it returns the restaurant's data. So let's set that data to the state. I'm going to create a new useState field. I'm going to import useState from React as well. And then we're going to create a new useState field. Our field is going to be called places, and the setter function is going to be setPlaces. Of course, this is going to be equal to useState, and at the start, our places can simply be an empty array. Now that we have that, you also have to remember that our getPlacesData is an asynchronous function. That means that we have to call the .then on it. I'm gonna put the .then right here, and the .then accepts a callback function, which then has the data. So right here, we're getting that data, and what do we want to do? We simply want to call the setPlaces and set the data to those places. One good thing we can also do would be to console log the data just so we can see if it's being fetched properly. Great, this seems all right. We have the function making a request. Of course, everything is static right now. We don't have real coordinates here, but we're going to make this work really soon. We just first have to see if it's going to work with static coordinates. If we go back to our browser, we can right-click, click Inspect, and then open up our console. And there we go. We have 7 different locations. All of these are restaurants. Every restaurant has a lot of information, like an address object with the entire city, street, and country. It has different awards, categories, different types of cuisines, and a lot of different information that we can use to display on the map and on our cards. That means that we are fetching the data from the API correctly. This was extremely easy, right? Rapid API makes it so easy to make API requests. But now is the time that we make this dynamic. We have to get real information from the position of our map, and then based on that, we have to call only the right restaurants for that map. To do that, we'll have to pass some information into this getPlacesData function. So let's create more useState fields. More specifically, I'm going to set a variable of coordinates and also set coordinates. That is going to be equal to useState, and then at the start, we can leave that as an empty object. We also need one more thing, which is going to be const_bounds and also setBounds. Remember the top right and the bottom left corner I was talking about. We are going to call them bounds. And we can say equal to useState, and the bounds are the start going to be set to null. Now we have this data, but it's not populated yet. These are just empty values. So we have to pass our setter function as props to our map. We're going to pass the setCoordinates prop, which is going to be equal to that setter function of setCoordinates. And I'm going to repeat the process one more time for the setBounds. Also, our map is going to have to use these coordinates, so let's also pass the state itself. Coordinates is equal to coordinates. Now, if we go to our map is going to be receiving different props, more specifically setCoordinates, setBounds, and also the coordinates themselves. As you can see, before we even declared empty coordinates, but we're no longer going to need that, so I'm simply going to delete it. Now the question is, how are we going to know when the coordinates or bounds of the map change? And the answer is, Google Map React will be doing that for us. We simply have to call a specific onChange function. Inside of the onChange, we are of course getting a callback function that has the event inside of it. So right inside of there, we can call the setCoordinates, and then inside of there, we are going to set it to an object. An object that has the latitude property, which is going to be equal to e.center.lat. And also we need the lng property, which is going to be equal to e.center.lng. But you might be wondering, how do I know that this event has the center, lat, and everything else we're gonna use? Well, an easy answer is always console log everything that you can. So I'm going to console log this event, and let's check it out in the browser. As you can see, we are console logging it. It has the bounds property, it has the center property, and also the margin bounds. In this case, we'll only need the center and the bounds. For the center, you can see it's lat0 and lng0. But then again, for the bounds, we're also going to use the northeast and the southwest. These bounds are going to be really helpful with setting our top right and bottom left corners. So to do that, I'm going to delete this console log, and I'm going to call the setBounds. Our setBounds is also going to be an object, and it's going to have the northeast bound, which is going to be equal to e.marginbounds.northeast. We're also going to have the southwest, which is going to be equal to e.marginbounds.southwest. This is all that we have to do to successfully populate these variables. So now, if we go back inside of our app, and if we console log these variables right there, coordinates and the bounds, what do you think the values are going to be? Are they actually going to change when we change the map? Think about it. I'm going to save it, and let's test it out. Before we check it out, let's properly set these coordinates here. At the start, we can say the latitude is going to be 0, and the longitude is also going to be 0. Well, if we reload and open up the console, you'll see there are a lot of warnings, errors, and stuff like that. But to just get a clear view, click here, Show Console Sidebar, and just click Info. That way, you'll get more meaningful messages. So as you can see, latitude is 0, longitude is 0, that is the starting value, and the bounds are null, just as we set it at the start. But now, if we move over, if we switch it, nothing is gonna happen. The values are not being updated. Why do you think that is the case? Well, if we go back to the code, even our editor is letting us know. React hook useEffect has missing dependencies, bounds, and coordinates. If we want this code to be reran every time that the map changes, we have to add the coordinates right there and also the bounds. That is one problem solved, but I also want to do something more. I want to automatically set the coordinates to be the coordinates of the user's location. So as soon as the user launches the page, we should be able to get their latitude and longitude. We can do that by using one more useEffect. This useEffect is only going to happen at the start. Remember, useEffect is a callback function, and then we have the dependency array. Now we need what we had before, an empty dependency array, because this should only happen at the start. To get the user coordinates, we can use the built-in browser geolocation API. We can say navigator dot geolocation dot get current position. And then in there, we're gonna have a callback function. We can choose what do we want to do with that data. So let's space it out like this. And in here, we are of course getting some data, but we can destructure it to immediately get the coordinates. And then we can immediately destructure it one more time to immediately get the latitude and the longitude. Now that we're getting the data, we can say set coordinates is going to be equal to, remember, that's going to be an object. It's going to have the lat equal to latitude and the lng equal to longitude. And finally, now that we're getting the coordinates, we no longer have to set these default values right there. We can simply leave this as an empty object. Now, our browser should be getting our geolocation immediately, and our map should be positioning around our location. Let's save it and check it out. If you reload the page, you should immediately see latitude and longitude. In this case, I've used a mock location. I'm not really in Berlin right now, but Google Chrome allows you to mess with the geolocation. If you click these three dots right there, click More Tools, and click Sensors, you'll get this little page right there. And there, you can override your current location. For example, I can set London as the current location, reload the page, and it will get me there. In this case, I'll stay with Berlin, reload one more time, and remember, you should be seeing your own location, of course, if you have the location allowed at the top. Great, now we are ready to actually fetch real restaurants around our location. And that's going to be the easy part now, trust me. We already have the coordinates and the bounds. Bounds are more important in this case. We simply need to pass them over to our getPlaces data. So as the first parameter, we can pass the bounds.southwest, SW, and then also bounds.northeast. Great. Now we're passing that over to the function. We can go back to our API, and now we can accept those bounds right there. We can say SW and northeast. So how can we actually pass these values to our API request? Well, as you can see here, there are static values. So I'm going to copy this entire object, remove it from here, and then simply paste it right here as the second parameter of our API call. Now we can remove all of these values, which are not true, they're just static, and we can simply use our southwest and northeast properties to get the real bounds. So we can say southwest.lat, that is going to be for the bottom left latitude. Then also for the bottom left longitude, we're going to use the southwest.lng. And finally, for this, we have to use the northeast latitude and northeast longitude. So let me repeat one more time, just so we don't have any mistakes. Bottom left is going to be southwest, and then the top right is going to be the northeast. Great. And we are also passing the headers. Now, the data that's being returned should be inside of our map. Let's check it out in the browser. As you can see, I got 33 restaurants in this case, and this address seems to be correct. As you can see, Berlin, Germany. And if I keep scrolling a bit more down, you'll also notice Berlin, Germany. So we are indeed fetching correct restaurants. And now we can start displaying them either on the map, or we can start with a list. Considering we already started with a list, let's go ahead and implement that nice looking card, and we'll be able to see restaurants in no time. So one question is, how can we get these places, which are in the state inside of the app.js, which you can see right there, to our list? And the answer is pretty simple. We're simply going to pass them over. Places is equal to places. Now, if we open up our list, go there, you'll notice that we've been using these fake places. We no longer have to do that. I'm gonna delete them, and simply at the top, I'm going to destructure the places from the props. Now, if we save that, we can go back, and already we have the names for all of these places. But these restaurants have so much more information. So let's render a nice looking card for each one of them. We can do that by scrolling down, seeing that each restaurant is a place detail, and we're passing all the place information. So let's go into our place detail component. I'm gonna close all of the other files, and we can simply focus on this one at the moment. So first of all, it would make sense to console log the place just so we know what information do we have. As you can see, we've already seen this. We have the address, address object, awards, booking, cuisine. There is quite a lot of information. So feel free to go through all of this and make the card look even better. Include more information if you want to. You can include the distance, the establishment type, and everything else you'd want. But in this case, we're gonna make a decent looking card. So let's import some things from Material UI. We can say import, and we're gonna need quite a few things. We're gonna need a box, of course, the typography for text. We're gonna have some buttons here, a card, card media for the image, card content, card actions, that's where our buttons are going to be, and finally a chip. All of this is coming from @materialui/core. We're also going to have some icons, so we can say import, and that's going to be location on icon from @materialui/icons/location on, without the icon at the end. And then we can copy that part. We're going to need one more icon. This one is going to be phone icon, and it's going to be coming from just phone. Finally, we're also going to import that rating component, which we imported in the map but haven't used yet. So import rating from @materialui/lab and then /rating. This is going to be it for the external imports. We just need to import the styles. So we can say import use styles from /styles. Of course, that's coming from styles.js inside of the place details, and these are going to be incredibly simple. We have some styles for the chip, the subtitle, and just some spacing. So nothing special right here. Let's go back to our component, and now we can start implementing the layout. Of course, first we can get the classes by saying const classes is equal to use styles like so, and we can wrap everything inside of a card component. Our card is going to have the elevation equal to 6. That's going to give it a nice shadow effect. Inside of the card, we're going to have our card media. Card media is a self-closing tag with a few properties. The first one is going to be style. In here, we need to define the height of the image. In this case, let's go with something like 350. Of course, feel free to modify that if you want to. Then we're also gonna use the actual image. The image, we have to use a ternary expression to check if the restaurant actually has the image. Not all of them do. So we can say if there is a place.photo, in that case, we can use the place.photo.images.large.url. This is going to be where the URL of the image will be stored at. And finally, if we don't have an image, we can use a demo image of a restaurant that I found online. You'll find this link somewhere where all the other styles are. Great. And finally, we need a title for our image. In this case, the title can simply be place.name. And that's going to be it for our card media. Below that, we are going to have a card content. Everything else is going to go inside of the card content. First of all, of course, we have the name. So we can say typography. This typography is going to have a property of gutter bottom. That means that we're just going to give it some extra margin at the bottom. And the variant is going to be quite big. It's going to be heading 5. Inside of there, we simply want to render the dynamic value of place.name. Let's save it and let's already see how it looks like. This is already so much better. You can see all the restaurants in Berlin. For somebody, this application will already be great, but you know that here on JavaScript Mastery, we always go a step further. So I want to really make this pop. We're going to add so much more information here. If you appreciate that, definitely make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know that you're in this current part of the video. Besides that, you might have noticed that we've seen one image a few times. And that image is, let me show you, this one. This is the demo image we used if there is no restaurant. You'll be able to see it a few more times, like right here. Considering that we're gonna write a lot of JSX code here, it might be better if we put our browser side by side with the editor. That way, we'll be able to see the changes live as we make them. Okay, I simply drag and drop my editor to the side, and now we are ready to continue writing code. Still inside of our card content, but below the typography, we're gonna have a box component. This box is going to have a display equal to flex. And it's also going to have justify content equal to space between. We wanna do that because we're gonna have two typographies inside of there. The first typography is going to have the variant equal to subtitle 1. And we're simply going to say price inside of there. Now the second one, we're going to copy it. The second one is going to have a gutter bottom, like this. It's also going to be variant of subtitle 1, and then inside of there, we can render place.price_level. This is going to give us the level of the price for this specific restaurant. And as soon as we save it, you can see price, and you can see this one is this one is cheap, but if we go here, this one is a bit more expensive. Now we can copy this exact part, and we're gonna use it for the ranking. So right here, instead of the price, I'm gonna say ranking. And instead of the price level, we're simply going to use ranking. Let's save it. And as you can see, ranking 14th out of 6,000 restaurants in Berlin. Nice. Now we're going to do something just a bit more complex. We want to map over all of the awards that a restaurant has gathered. We can do that by opening a dynamic block and saying place dot. We use this to be sure that the place exists. Then we can access the awards, and then one more time dot, and finally we can map over it. Of course, map accepts a callback function, and in there we're not gonna have curly braces, we're simply going to have parentheses because we want to instantly return something. Inside of the map, we get a singular value of what we're mapping through, so in this case, we're getting an award. For each award, we want to show a box, like this. That box is going to have a display of flex and also justify content of space between. It's also going to have align items equal to center. Inside of there, we can render a small image like this, img. It is a self-closing tag that has the source property, and we're going to say award.images.small. Of course, every image has to have the alt tag, so we can simply say award.display_name. Great, let's save it. And as you can see, here we have those little award icons. One thing we can do is to this box, we can say my is equal to 1. M stands for margin and Y stands for Y-axis, top and bottom. So this is going to give it a margin of top and bottom 1. As you can see, it's going to space them out properly. This is a Material UI feature. And finally, still inside of the box, but below our image, we want to have a typography explaining that specific award. So that can be a subtitle 2, variant is equal to subtitle 2, and the color is going to be equal to text secondary. So it's a grayish color. And then inside of there, we can display award.display_name. Let's save it and check it out. Take a look. This restaurant got 3 certificates of excellence, 2019, 2020, and 2021. That's great. Finally, we also might want to know which type of food does each restaurant prepare. Let's open a new dynamic block and say place ? Cuisine and then .map. Inside of there, we have a callback function. And as with every map function, we get a type of the cuisine right there. But we're only going to use the name of the food, so we can simply say name. We destructured it right there. So for each one, we want to show a chip component. If you're not sure what a chip is, you're going to see it really soon. It's a really straightforward component. The only thing you have to do is pass in the key, because we're mapping over it. Then you have to give it a size. In this case, I'm going to set it to small. It has to have the label. In our case, that's going to be the name. And finally, we're also going to give it one class name. Class name is going to be equal to classes.chip. And if we save that, take a look. Looks like I've missed one question mark, and I've got cannot read property map of undefined. So this question mark dot is a new feature in JavaScript. And as you can see, it can save your day quite a lot of times. So one of the many restaurants didn't have a cuisine property, and therefore we weren't able to map over it. So as soon as I add that question mark, the issue is going to be fixed. So you always have to know that you absolutely have something before you try mapping over it. Looks like we also have one issue inside of our app. Right here, we're trying to send the bounds.southwest and northeast. This worked before because our bounds were already filled. But now, as we don't have them, it's not possible to call the .southwest of null. So inside of here, line 13, make sure to change this to an empty object as well. Now if you reload, we're back to having all the restaurants right here. And look at that, we can also see the chips. So each one of these little gray pills is called a chip in Material UI language. Okay, with that fixed, we are ready to add final details to our place details. We have to know the address of the restaurant. So we can say if place !address, if it exists. In that case, we want to render a JSX block that's going to show the address. That is going to be a typography component. That typography is going to have a gutter bottom property, and also the variant is going to be equal to body2. Color is going to be equal to text secondary. And finally, it's going to have a class name. So we can say here, class name is equal to classes.subtitle. Great. Finally, what are we going to put inside of there? Well, we're going to use our location on icon. It is a self-closing tag. And then right next to it, we're going to render the place.address. Let's save it. And as you can see, our location pin is right there. And here is our address. Now that I look at it, this here should have been the subtitle too. It would look just a bit better. Finally, we also want to know the phone number. So I'm going to copy this whole part and we're going to just make a few changes. If we have the phone, then we're going to render something. This is going to stay as subtitle. The class name is going to change to classes.spacing. And we want to render the phone icon. Of course, next to the phone icon, we can render place.phone. Let's save it. And as you can see, now we have the phone as well. And the final part is adding the two buttons that can lead us to the TripAdvisor page of a restaurant and to the restaurant's own website. So let's create a card actions part. Inside of the card actions, we can have a button. This button is going to be of a size is equal to small. It is going to have a primary color, so color equal primary. And it's going to have the on-click property. Let me move this a bit to the right for you. On click, we want to create a callback function and then simply call the window.open. And then in here, we have to use the URL we want to open. And that is going to be place.web_URL. The window.open also accepts a second parameter, which is a string that says _blank. If we add this, it's going to open that website in a new tab, opposed to just replacing our own website. Okay, and finally, inside of there, we can say TripAdvisor. Now we can also copy this button and everything is going to stay the same. We're just going to change the URL from web.url to website. And again, change the text to website. With this, I'm going to indent this properly, remove these spaces, save it, and this is our card fully done. As you can see, we have these two buttons. I'm going to click to the TripAdvisor page of the first one. Okay, this seems like a great restaurant. It's well rated. You can read the reviews and then decide if you want to go there, or if you're still not convinced, you can click website. They also have a good looking responsive website, so we're surely gonna go there, right? And we're done with the cards. Let me maximize this, and I'm going to put this to the side. As you can see, this is already looking so much better. Now each restaurant has so much more information about it. The next thing we can do is to take the data about these restaurants and display them on the map. So let's do that right away. Our next really important part is taking these places from the app and then displaying them on the map. We can do that by going to app.js, taking the same places we've been passing over to our list, and then sending them over to our map as well. So we can say places is equal to places. As you can see, we're sending a lot of props from one component to another. This is still okay because we're only sending it one level deep, from our app to our map. But we're not sending it 2 or 3 levels deep. Whenever that happens for you, I would advise you to switch to using either Redux or, more simply, React context. With that said, we're passing the places, so now inside of our map, we can finally destructure them from the props right here. And you might be wondering, how do we actually show the pins on the map? Well, Google Map React makes it incredibly simple. You simply have to render them right here inside of the map. So let's open a new dynamic block and say places ? Dot, and in this case we want to map over them. Again, we're looping over it, so it's the same situation, and we're getting a singular place right here. For each place, we want to render a div, and this div has to have a few properties. We're gonna give it a class name. In this case, it's going to be classes.markerContainer. And then most importantly, we have to have the latitude, which is going to be equal to place.latitude. And also we have to have the longitude, which is the lng, which is going to be place.longitude. We're getting these values as strings, and in here they have to be numbers, so we can use the number constructor to convert these values into numbers. So make sure to write it like this. And now, since we're mapping over this div, we have to have the key. In this case, we can set it as I, which is the index from inside of our map. Now, inside of our div, we want to render different things depending on if we're on mobile device or on desktop. We can say if we are on mobile device, so if is mobile, in that case, we simply want to render out the icon. So we can say location on outlined icon. Let's see if that's how we called it at the top, location on outlined icon. And let's pass the color, which is equal to primary, and also the font size is equal to a string of large. Great. But if we're not on mobile, we want to render just a bit more information. So in this case, we're gonna have a paper component. Paper is basically a div with a background, and it's going to have elevation equal to 3. That's going to give it some box shadow. We're also gonna give it a class name equal to classes.paper. Inside of that paper, we're gonna put a typography. This typography is going to have a class name, which is going to be equal to classes.typography. It is also going to have a variant equal to subtitle 2, and it's going to have gutter bottom because we want to have some margin at the bottom. And in here, we simply want to render place.name. Finally, we need just 2 more things. One is going to be the image. Our image is going to have a class name equal to classes.pointer. And then we also want to have the source. We can copy the source from our place details at the top because it's going to be the same. So let's copy this entire thing right here. Okay, and I'm going to say source is equal to, and I'll paste the entire ternary from our place details. Great. Finally, we also need the alt tag, and the alt is going to be place.name. And the last thing is going to be the rating. Let's save it and see how does it look like. Okay, as you can see right now we have just the pins, even though we are on desktop. Based on what we've seen, that means that this isMobile variable is actually the isDesktop and not isMobile. So if the min width is larger than 600, that means that it is desktop. So we can say if it's not desktop, then show the pin, otherwise show the paper. And all of our restaurants are here. As you can see, we can hover over them to see them entirely. And right now we cannot yet click on them to see more details on the left side, but they are definitely here. Let's just add the ratings below the image. To add the rating, we'll use that experimental rating component. It is a self-closing tag, and we're going to give it a property size, which is equal to small. We're also going to give it a value, which is going to be equal to a number. We need to use that number constructor to get the rating, and then we're going to pass the place.rating inside of it. And finally, we need to pass the read-only property because our users cannot change the ratings. We're only reading it. Now that I think about it, I think that we forgot placing the rating on our list. So let's copy it and let's go back to our place details. Our rating should have been just below this typography. To display our rating, I'm going to copy this box right there and just change a few things. Instead of this typography, we're going to paste the same rating we've used before, but it's not going to be small this time. And then our bottom typography is going to say out of, and then in here, place.num_reviews, and then finally reviews. Let's save it, see if it's imported correctly. Yep, in here we have the lab/rating, and let's see if it's imported correctly in the map. In here, we have just /lab, but we need lab/rating, so let's add that right here. With that said, we should be seeing all of our paper restaurants on the map, and now on the left side, we should also see the rating in our list. There we go. We have 5 stars out of 143 reviews, and now you can see all of the ratings right inside of our map with the image and with the title of the restaurant. This wasn't that hard, right? Once we got all of the data from the Rapid API, we just simply had to display it on the left side and on the map. The key thing here was knowing that we have to use the latitude and the longitude to display those places right inside of the map. Now that we're displaying these places on the map, let's make them clickable. And that's exactly where this onChildClick method is going to come in handy. OnChildClick is an event listener. So we're going to have a method that's going to listen for our events. And whenever we click on a child, we are going to get it right here as a parameter. And then what do we want to do with it? Well, we somehow have to get the information about which child was clicked from the map component all the way to our list component. And how can we do that? Well, we could create a child and setChildClick field right here, a state for example, and only use it inside of the map, not inside of the app or place details or the list. So in this case, we're going to use a method called lifting the state up. So let's say that we start by declaring the state field right here. We're going to use the use state. We're going to call it something like child clicked and also set child click. And initially it's going to be set to null. But now we want to take that state to the parent component of both the list and the map. And in this case, that's going to be the app component. So right inside of here, we are going to get that state, child click, and set child click. Of course, you could have also solved this problem by using context or Redux, but in this video, I wanted to keep it simple. So now let's pass this method right here, set child click, and we're gonna go back inside of our map. We get that function right here through props. And then finally, what do? we simply call the setChildClicked, and we set that child right there. Now, if we go back to the app, when we call that function, the childClicked variable is going to be populated, and now we can pass it over to the list. So we can say childClicked is equal to childClicked. Finally, if we go to the list, now we can do something with that value. So in here, childClicked, and for starters, let's simply console log it. So I'm going to say console log. I'm going to put the console log inside of the object, and in there, I'm going to say childClicked. If you put the property inside of the console log, it's going to give you a bit more info. If we did a console log just like this, and by the way, this is a great tip that I learned. If you did a console log just like this, and for example, the value is 5, if you had a lot of console logs, you wouldn't know what this 5 stands for. But in the case above, it's going to give you an object where it's going to say childClicked is equal to 5. That way, you know exactly what you console logged. So with that said, let's see the output. Going back to the browser, I'm gonna clear the console and reload the page one more time. There are some warnings here, which we're gonna fix later on, but for now, let's simply clear the console, and now let's try clicking on a few restaurants. If I click here, you can see childClicked, and that is 25. I can keep clicking, I'm gonna get 10, 1, and so on. This is not going to be extremely precise. For example, if I click at the title, or if I click below at the rating, it's sometimes not going to recognize it. Always try to click right in the middle of the image. That way, you're gonna make sure that it's recognized. As you can see, we're getting a lot of these childClick properties. That means that we have the information about which element is clicked. Now that we have that info, the question is, how do we make our list scroll to a specific element on the list when we click on the map? For that, we're gonna have to use React refs. That's going to be just a bit more complicated, but don't worry, I'm sure you can do it. First of all, we're going to import useEffect and also create ref from React. So we're gonna use that useEffect right here. UseEffect accepts a callback function and it has a dependency array. We want to recall this useEffect every time that the places change. So I'm gonna put the places right inside of here. Now we want to create a state field that's going to contain all the references. So we can say const, and let's call it something like lrefs, element references. And we're gonna say set lrefs. That is going to be equal to the use state. And at the start, they're simply going to be set to an empty array because at the start, we don't have any places. Once we get the places, we want to set them to the state. So how exactly are we going to create these references? We can do it like this. Const refs is equal to, we use the array constructor, and then inside of there, we want to construct as many elements as there are places. So in there, we pass the places.length. Then we're gonna call the .fill. .fill is going to start filling the array, so we can call it like this. And then we want to map over that array. Again, we have a callback function inside of the map. This time, we're not interested in one specific thing at the start. We only need the index. In cases like these, it's a good idea to put the underscore. That means you're not going to use that first parameter, but you need the second one. And we want to return refs I. So we want to access the refs and return that specific thing. Or if the ref doesn't exist yet, in that case, we can create ref. So we want to create a new ref. And this refs here is not going to be like that because we are still declaring it in that line. We have to use the lrefs right there. I know it's a bit more complicated, but this is something you're not going to do that often. Usually you're going to have to create one ref. In this case, we really have to create many as there are places. Finally, now that we have those refs, we can say set lrefs is equal to refs. Now we can actually use those references right below here in place details. So we're going to give each grid item a ref. In this case, that's going to be ref is equal to lrefs, and then we access that specific index of the current place. And then we have to pass few props to place details. Remember what we talked about. Once we click on this element, we want to scroll to that specific restaurant on the list. So we're gonna set the selected property. Is this restaurant selected? And how can we know that? Well, if the child clicked is equal to index. If that's the case, that means that this place details has been selected. This child clicked is a string though, so we have to convert it into a number before we actually test it. And we're also going to pass that ref by saying ref prop is equal to, in this case, lrefs I. So the same thing we did above. We might not even need it later on in here. I'm gonna check that to be sure. But now we're passing the selected and the ref prop to the place details. So let's use it right here. We have the selected and we also have the ref prop. We're gonna use this to make a simple check. We're gonna say if selected. In that case, we want to call that ref prop and we're gonna use the question mark dot notation. Each ref has the current property and then one more time question mark dot scroll into view. That's a built-in method on the element, on the HTML element. We're gonna put an object for options and we can say behavior is equal to a string of smooth and block is going to be set to a string of start. This is everything that we have to do. Now that I think about it, if we go back to the list, we don't need this ref right there. We are using it right inside of the place details. Let's save it and take a look. We are getting an error saying that we don't at the start have the places and therefore we cannot create refs. So this is the right opportunity to implement our circular progress, which is the loading. So let's go inside of our app component and then in here, let's create a new state called loading. So I'm gonna create a new state field and I'm gonna call it is loading and then set is loading. At the start, it's going to be set to false. Then, right before we call the getPlaces data, I'm going to set it to true. And finally, after we're done fetching the data, right here in the .then, we can set the loading or set is loading back to false. Finally, now that we have this state, we can pass that state over to the list by saying is loading is equal to is loading. Now we're getting it right here through the props is loading. And just below this typography, we're gonna add a logical block saying is loading. In that case, we want to render a div. That div is going to have a class name equal to classes.loading. And inside of there, we're gonna have a circular progress, which is going to have the size equal to 5 rem. And otherwise, we want to render everything else. So the entire form control. We can do it like that and make sure to close everything. That's going to be just below our grid. Once we're closing it like this, we have to wrap everything into a React fragment. Everything has to be inside of one element. And then just below this grid ending tag, we can also end the fragment and then end the code block. Okay, I closed it correctly, but in here I should have used a colon. That part is done. We're also missing a question mark right there because even though we're having a loading right there, this part also is depending on the places. So we're adding it right here. And there's also one mistake I've made. Going into place details, I have scroll into view instead of scroll. So let's go ahead and fix that. And finally, let's take a look at that beautiful scroll in the browser. There we have our restaurants and I'm gonna click and would you look at that? Our scroll works wonderfully. We can scroll. Let's check out this one, Dolcini, and it opens up. Nice, our scroll is finally done. The thing that would make sense to do next are these select elements which we've nicely created. We need to be able to toggle between restaurants, hotels, and attractions, and we need to be able to filter out restaurants, hotels, and attractions by rating. To start filtering our places, we can visit the source, and then components, and then finally list. Inside of here, we created that type state and also the rating state. Now we're going to use the same method we used just a few minutes ago. We are going to lift the state up. As you can see, we're gonna copy this and move it into the app.js. So right here at the top, we have the type, set type, rating, and set rating. Now we're gonna pass these properties as props to our list. So let's do it like this. Type is equal to type. Then we have the set type as well. Set type is equal to set type. Then we're gonna have the rating, which is equal to rating. And then finally set rating, which is equal to set rating. Now, this is not the best practice ever. We are declaring everything in our app and then we're passing it into our list. As you can see, we're creating a lot of states inside of our app and then we're passing everything as props through our components. Once again, this is not the best practice, but in this case, it's just fine because we're passing it one level down only to the list. But if we had one more component inside of the list, which we needed to pass those props again from the list to that component or even deeper, in that case, I would strongly advise you to use React context. But in this case, this is just fine. So let's go into our list and let's get these things from props. That's going to be type, set type, rating, and set rating. And again, the only reason why we're doing this is now in the app, we have access to the ratings and to the types. And now we can use them to get different data from our getPlaces API. So as the first parameter to our getPlaces data, even before the bounds, we're going to pass over the type. That way, our function is going to know what data it needs to fetch. So let's go to our getPlaces data. And then right inside of here, we are going to copy this URL and put it right inside of here instead of this static variable. I'm going to turn this into a template string like this. And now, as you can see, in here we have restaurants. But in this case, to make it dynamic, we're simply going to get that type that we're receiving through the parameters. That way, if we have hotels, it's going to be hotels. If we have attractions, it's going to be attractions. This simple change made our code dynamic. Of course, for this function to be reran when the type changes, we have to add our type to the dependency array. Let's save it and go back to the browser. Here we have all the restaurants, and if we switch to hotels, notice that nice loading bar we added, and here we have our hotels. You might have thought that this is going to be so much more difficult. We had to do a lot of work for the restaurants, but now see how easy it is for the hotels. We simply changed a variable and it works. We can also now make it work for attractions. Again, we have that nice loading, and let's see what we can visit in Berlin. Great. This works perfectly. This was a bit easier than we thought, right? Now the next step is to fix the filtering based on rating. To do that, we're going to add one more use effect. And you might be thinking, wait, is it even legal to have so many use effects? And the answer is yes, but every single one of them needs to serve a different purpose. For example, this one happens only at the start. You can see it has this dependency array. This one happens once type changes or coordinates or bounds. But this one, let's create it like this, a callback function again, and a dependency array. This one is going to change only when the rating changes. As you can see, each one serves a specific purpose. The only thing we want to do in here is say const filtered places is equal to places dot filter. The filter method also takes in a callback function. In this case, we get a place, and we're going to say if place.rating is larger than the current rating. If that is the case, then we want to return that specific place. That means if the rating of the place is larger of the currently selected rating, then we want to return that place. Finally, we want to set these places to a new state. So just at the top, we can say use state, and we're going to call this filtered places and set filtered places. And finally, at the start, that's going to be set to an empty array. and right in here, we can call set filtered places. We're gonna call it and pass in the filtered places variable. Great. So now the question is, where are we gonna use these filtered places? Well, if we have any filters, then we can pass them to our map and also to our list. We are already passing places, so let's pass it right here. If we have filtered places, so we can say if there is filtered places dot length. In that case, we want to pass filtered places, but else we want to simply pass places. Like this. Make sure to change it both in the list and in the map. One more time, if we have the filtered places, then render the filtered places, else just render the places. Then again, every time that we get new places data, we have to reset our filtered places. So let's say set filtered places back to an empty array. Great. Let's save it and check it out. Okay, now we have restaurants. Let's go to hotels. Right now we can see all of the restaurants. This one has 4 stars, 4 stars, and most of them have 5 stars. But now let's click above 3.0. Everything is still here. And if we click above 4, you'll notice that now you can see only the best restaurants. Our filter works. And if we go back to all, you should be able to see all the restaurants. Now we know that our filter absolutely works. So what would you say would be the next step in making this even more complete? We already have a really complex, full-fledged travel advisor application. What else can we do? Well, don't forget, our search is not working yet. So if I wanted to go to New York, for example, right now, I cannot do that. So let's go ahead and fix that right now. To implement our search, we're going to revisit our header component. We haven't been here in a long time. As you can see, in here we have this autocomplete component. Our autocomplete requires 2 props that need to be passed into it. One thing is the onLoad handler. So what is going to happen once we load the autocomplete component? And then the second thing is the onPlaceChanged handler, and what's going to happen once we change the place. So let's implement these 2 functions right inside of the header component. The onLoad is going to be fairly simple. We can say const onLoad is equal to an arrow function, and then in here we just want to return something. More specifically, we want to set something to the state. So at the top, we're going to import useState from React. Just below our classes, we're going to initialize a new state field, const autocomplete, and set autocomplete. That is going to be equal to useState. And at the start, that autocomplete is going to be set to null. So what's going to happen on load? Well, we're going to get that autocomplete. We can call it AutoC, and we're going to set that autocomplete right in here so that we have it in the state and so that we can work with it. This is the only thing that the onLoad function does. Finally, we have to implement the const onPlaceChanged. That's also going to be an arrow function, but we're going to have just a bit more logic inside of it. We need to find the latitude and the longitude of the new location. We can do that like this. Const lat is equal to autocomplete dot get place, we call that as a function, dot geometry dot location, and then finally dot lat, and we call it as a function. If you're wondering how I got to this information, you can find it online or on Google Maps documentation. But in this video, I'm laying it out for you so that you don't have to waste hours finding it. And now we can also find the longitude by simply saying LNG right there and also position LNG. The question is, what do we want to do once we get our new place? Well, we want to set it to the state. More specifically, we want to go back inside of the app and change the coordinates. We can do that by passing the set coordinates as a prop down to the header. Now in the header, we can use that set coordinates, and right inside of here, we can call it set coordinates. Remember, we set it as an object, and we specify the lat and the lng. This is all that we have to do. With that specified, our autocomplete should be almost done. Let's use this onPlaceChanged right here. And right now you can see we misspelled the autocomplete. So let's fix that. Autocomplete, and now everything should be fine. But there's one thing that I didn't tell you. And that is that if you take a look at this, we're never actually connecting it to the Google Maps API. We didn't input any API key or any such thing like that. With this React Google Maps API, we have to do it using a script tag in the public index.html. I'm going to give you the code for that script with all the other codes I gave you so far, so make sure to copy and paste it right here. The only thing you have to change is going to be this API key right here. That API key has to be the same key that we are using inside of our map component right here. So make sure to copy it and then paste it right here inside of this index.html. Once we did that, we also have to keep in mind that this is using the Places API, no longer just the regular Google Maps to display a map. We have to get all the places on Earth. So we have to go back to our Google Developers Console. I am back on Google Cloud Platform, and you can see that we're currently using only Maps JavaScript API. So we have to go under APIs if you're not here already. And then finally, let's add the Places API. There we go. We can click on it. And then finally, we should be able to click Enable. There we go. We're going to enable this Places API. And right now you can see that both APIs are enabled. Let's try to go back to our application and see if everything works. First of all, I'm going to reload my page. Let's try searching for something like New York. And if we click it, we're instantly being teleported to New York. All of the restaurants are here, but they quickly disappeared. That means that switching the map works, but we still have some minor issues with fetching the restaurants depending on that specific location. Let's try to debug and fix that right away. I also noticed that there are some empty restaurants with no ratings, no name, no image, nothing. So we need to be able to filter out those dummy restaurants. To do that, we can go back to our app, and then as soon as we get the data, we need to filter that data to remove these things. So right here inside of set places, we can say data.filter. We get a specific place right there in the callback function. And then we simply want to check, is there the name? Does this place have a name? If it does it also have the place.number of reviews is larger than 0? If both of these conditions are true, then we want to keep that place. Also, one important check is to only make this request if there are bounds. So just at the top, I'm going to say if bounds, only then we want to do all of this code. If we don't have the latitude, the longitude, the southwest, and the northeast, we don't want to make this request. And just to be sure everything is always going to work, let's put a question mark right here in case we don't have the data. Let's save it and test it out in the browser. There we go, we can see all the best restaurants in London. And finally, let's switch to something like New York. It loaded all of them, but for some reason, it switched back to restaurants in London in this list, but on the map, we cannot see anything. Let's inspect this even further by doing some console logs. So I always want to know which ones are currently active places, and also which are the currently active filtered places. Maybe that's causing the error. So let's save it. And now hopefully these console logs are going to help us debug this situation. I deleted all of the console logs and I'm going to switch back to New York. As you can see, filtered places are empty, which is fine. We can try switching this to above 3.0. Now everything is there. Above 4.0, still all of them are there. And above 4.5, all of them are there, because this API gives us only the best restaurants anyway. But this time, these restaurants didn't disappear. So what was the catch the last time? I just noticed that this if statement is not correct. It's always going to be executed. Our bounds currently are set to be an empty object, and an empty object is always truthy. So rather than checking for bounds, we can check for bounds.southwest and bounds.northeast. If bounds are an empty object, then this here is going to be falsy. Let's test it out. Okay, as soon as I reloaded, everything works, and now let's go back to New York. We can see them on the map, which works fine, and hopefully they won't switch back this time. I don't see them switching back, so this was possibly the solution to our problem. Let's try to visit one more place, something like Paris, to see if that works. And unfortunately, we still have restaurants from New York. That means that we haven't properly reset the values of places when switching to a new place. We can solve this problem really easily by simply removing the coordinates from the dependency array. We need to do that because now, in the header, we are changing the coordinates, and then they're being changed 2 times, both in here, on place changed, and also on map right there. So we're going to remove them from the dependency here, and we only want to recall the getPlaces data once we change the bounds. If we now save this, we can test it out, and it should work. We are currently in London. Let's try switching to New York. We have a nice loading there, and let's see if we get New York restaurants. We do, as you can see, they're all there. And let's try to switch to one more place, something like Paris. And we got all the restaurants in Paris. Our explore new places search now completely works. Now we can get the restaurants for our current position. We can move around the map to get new restaurants each time. And we can also use the search to get to any city or place on Earth. That was definitely a major feature. The entire travel advisor functionality is now done. User can visit different places, get all the data about restaurants, also hotels, and finally attractions. Everything in one single place. But wouldn't it be nice that they can also see what's the weather like there where they're visiting? For example, we're in France right now. Wouldn't it be nice if we could see what's the weather in this nice green park right here? That's exactly what we're going to implement right now. To find the API we need for that, you can go to Rapid APIs Hub and there search for Open Weather Map. This is the API we'll be using. Make sure to click here to subscribe to that API as well. And from here, we'll use only one single endpoint, which is the search weather data. Back in our code, let's close all the files and simply open the API index.js. Right below our getPlaces data, we're also going to export const get weather data. And that's also going to be an async function. And what do we want to do in there? Well, we're also going to have a try and catch block. If something goes wrong, we're simply going to console log that error. But what is the actual API request we'll be making? Well, process is similar to the thing above. We're going to say const, destructure the data, and then we want to make an await axios.get call. We have to see which URL are we making the request to. We can see that right in here, URL. Let's copy and paste that. There we go. And finally, let's also copy these options, the params and the headers. I copy them. I'm going to add a comma after the URL and then open the options object. Inside of that options object, we can paste all of the options. We won't need many of these properties. For example, query, we don't need that. Count, we don't need that as well. Mode, the only thing we need is going to be the longitude and the latitude. So let's remove all of this and put this in one line like this. So you might already guess where we would be getting the latitude and the longitude from, right from our params right here, lat and lng. Let's make sure that we indeed pass that. So inside of the app.js, we're going to import get weather data right here. And then just before calling the get places data, we're also going to call get weather data. And we're going to pass the coordinates .lat and also coordinates .lng. We can repeat the process. We want to call the .then. We have a callback function that's going to give us the data. And finally, we want to say set weather data is going to be equal to data. Of course, we haven't yet created the set weather data state, so let's do that right away. We can even copy the places and simply say set weather data and weather data. At the start, that's going to be equal to an empty array. Now that we know that we're passing the latitude and the longitude, let's go back to index. We're getting them right there, and let's also set them. So latitude is equal to latitude, and lon is equal to lng in this case. Finally, the headers contain our API key and Rapid API host. We can leave that for now. Later on, we're gonna switch that to environment variables. And finally, what do we do with the data? Well, we're simply going to return it. Okay, this part is done. Our data is here. It's getting set to the state. And finally, we want to pass it to the map. So just below, I'm going to say weather data is equal to weather data right here. We can go inside of the map. We can get the weather data at the top from props. And just below the entire mapping of places, we're gonna open one more JSX block. Inside of here, we're gonna say weather data (dot)list and then (dot)map. Of course, in here, we get the data and we also get the index. We mapped over quite many things in this video. We're going to return a JSX block, and for each weather data, we are going to return a div. That div is going to have the key equal to the index, and it's also going to have the latitude, which is going to be equal to data.coord.lat. And finally, we also need the lng. lng property is going to be equal to data.coord.lon. And the only thing we need inside of that div is going to be our image. Our image is going to have the source equal to, now bear with me, it's a template string. It starts with https:// open weathermap.org/image/w, and then in here we want to use the dynamic value that we're getting from here, data.weather0, and then finally .icon. Of course, we want to add the .png at the end. This entire string is also going to be in all of the resources that you can find in the description. Now, I know we've been typing a lot of code. Let's save it and let's check it out in the browser. And as you can see, London is currently cloudy. That's not unusual for London. But these icons are too small, so let's make them just a bit bigger. I'm going to give this image a height, which is going to be equal to 100. There we go. Now they're just a bit bigger. Let's go back to Paris and see what's the weather in that nice park right there. I'm not sure where it is. There we go. It just says that it's currently night with stars. So now you know it's night here. I'm recording these videos and I'm gonna go to sleep soon. But with that said, our weather data is actually showing. As you can see, it wasn't that hard. Rapid API makes it extremely easy to fetch APIs, and now you already know how to work with maps, so it's also easy to display the icons and all of these cards. Great. Our application is looking so much better now. The last part I wanted to show you is how to change the styles of the map. We can do that really easily by going to Map, inside of these options, we're going to have an object, and that object is going to have a few properties. First one is going to be disable default UI, which is going to be set to true. Then we also want to have zoom control, which is going to be set to true. So this is going to disable most of the UI, but we still want to have the zoom buttons. And finally, we pass the styles as map styles. Of course, these styles are not defined, so we are yet to do that. But I want to show you an incredibly cool way that you can style the map extremely easily and immediately get all of the styles for your map. There is a website called snazzymaps.com, and in here you can see a lot of different maps that you can search for. Let's go with this one. The only thing you have to do to get these styles for your map is click expand code and then simply copy all of the styles into one file. I already found my preferred styles, so I'm going to put the styles here inside of the map, say map styles.js, and then I'm going to paste them right here. Again, the link is going to be in the description. Now in the map, we simply have to import these styles by saying import map styles from /map styles. That part is now done. Let's save it and take a look. The styles I've chosen just gave everything just a bit more color and removed the names of streets. Now we have only the big city names and everything is looking just a bit cleaner. One last step before deploying this application is set the environment variables so that nobody else can find your API keys. The process of doing that is not that hard. The only thing you have to do is create a .env file right in the root of your folder. If you're using GitHub and you plan on deploying this project, also add the .env file inside of your gitignore. That way, all of your secrets won't be pushed to GitHub. With that said, let's add these few variables. Every environment variable has to start with React app. And the first one is going to be React app Google Maps API key, and then you put an equal sign there. Then the second one is going to be React_app and then _rapid API weather API key. And finally, the third one is going to be React_app _rapid API _travel API key. Great. Finally, we just have to find these keys in our code. Here's the Google Maps one, and we're going to replace it inside of our environment variables right here. Just simply paste it, and that's going to be it. Then, once you actually have it in here, the only thing you have to do is delete this and simply call process.env and then the name of the variable. In this case, that's going to be React_app Google _maps _API _key. I said underscore a lot of the times here, but there we go. Now let's also find the remaining API keys, which are inside of our API. So that's going to be here. This is the API key for the Travel Advisor app. So I'm going to put it right here. And finally, the last one is for our weather API. I'm going to put it right here. And as you can see, these are exactly the same. I'm guessing that's because we are using the same Rapid API account, so the key can also be the same. Therefore, we can simply rename this to Rapid API key, like this. A lot shorter. I won't have to mention a lot of underscores this time. So let's simply rename this. I'm going to delete first this string, say process.env and then React_app _rapid API _key. And the same thing is going to happen right here, process.env and then the name of the environment variable. One incredibly important thing to make this work is you have to open your terminal by going to view and then terminal, and you have to stop it from running by pressing Ctrl+C and then Y. Then you have to rerun your server for all of these changes to take effect. So now when I rerun it, all of the environment variables are going to be filled. And as soon as you get back to our travel advisor, as you can see, everything works just perfectly. Now, I know that this was a really long video and you have to get some rest. Definitely do that. But I have a challenge for you. Next time you start coding, come back to this application and find one more interesting API from Rapid API platform. I see there's airports, flights, hotels, webcams. Just find one more API that can be implemented into this app and then try to implement it by following all of the guidelines you learned by following this video. Great. With that said, let's finally deploy this project to Netlify. Netlify is great for deploying just simple front-end projects like this one. So you can visit the netlify.com website and either sign up if you haven't already or log in. Once you're logged in, you can click to Sites right here and then go back to your code, open up the terminal, stop it from running, and finally run npm run build. This is going to create the optimized production build that you'll be simply able to drag and drop onto Netlify, and it's going to be deployed in a matter of seconds. There we go, it's built out. You should be able to see this build folder and simply click Reveal in File Explorer. Once you have it, simply scroll down and drag and drop it right inside of here. In a matter of seconds, it should say site has been deployed. And there we go. Before we check it out, let's simply go to the main settings and edit the site name. Something like travel, advisor, JSM should do the trick. Let's save it and let's visit it. Okay, the website wants to know my location. That's fine. For you, the geolocation should work and you should see all the restaurants near you. In my case, it opened up all of the most popular restaurants in London and you can simply browse through them. And let's also go for hotels. This one looks pretty good. And finally, let's see what can we visit in London. There should be a lot to visit there. Okay, National Gallery, the British Museum, and the Westminster Abbey. Great. Our application is fully done. And with that, we've came to the end of this phenomenal video. This one took me quite a long time to make, so please leave a like and comment down below what do you think of this one and what would you like to see in the future. Also, huge thanks to Rapid API, not only for sponsoring this video, but for creating such an amazing platform where you can find hundreds of thousands of different APIs. And if you'd like to build even more professional project than this one, make sure to put your email in the mailing list down below. I'm gonna keep you updated about all of the new projects that will be coming along. Again, thank you so much for watching this video, stay healthy, and see you in the next one. Have a wonderful day.